Hi, I'm Dan Schmitt. I do a motorcycle racing TV show called Team Chicago Champ. My email is teamdan45@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear from my audience. My website is teamchicago.tv with my good friend Ken Rottmann, and he's got a great collection of motorcycles. We're going to look at some of these really special bikes, and he's going to tell us a little bit about these bikes, and we're going to look at some great racing action to mix in to get an idea what we're talking about, which may help. So remember my email. Like I said, I like people to let me know what you think of these clips up on YouTube, and it's teamdan45@gmail.com. I really appreciate what Ken has put up in his shop. This is a photo of John Schwartz and me. This photo is from Sycamore Speedway, 1971. I remember chasing John in this race, and I believe he won the race, but the flag man put the flag on me. Well, Ken has picked up a CCM motorcycle from John, and he's going to tell us all about this motocross bike.
Hello, this is a CCM Clues competition machine. Alan Clues raced for BSA, and he lived in England. He raced for BSA scrambles and trials and whatnot, and he loved BSA 441 Victors. And BSA was about to die, and he went to BSA looking for some frames to build his own bike, and BSA told Alan Clues, they said, we're done. We're going to sell you our whole works bike, so you can't just buy one or two frames. You're going to have to buy all our frames and all our parts, all our competition. So he got all the works, BSA works parts. He brought it home and he started building some bikes for himself and his friends, and then word got out, and then everybody wanted one. They were really works, special made bikes. And then right down the street from him was E-Talk Frames, EMC. And he said, I'll weld your frames. I'll weld your frames from chrome moly. And he welded these beautiful frames, and they lightened this bike up. This bike raced competition in the 70s against Japanese and other European motorcycles that were two-stroke, and this was the only four-cycle motorcycle racing against all the two-strokes, and it did very well. The weight, they trimmed the weight down to where it weighed not more than the two-strokes. It was as light as the two-strokes, 220 pounds or less. By oil in the frame, chromoly with oil in the frame. They put the pegs on the engine cases. They made special engine cases to put the pegs on so they didn't have to have the heavy hangers for the foot pegs. They used magnesium throughout this motorcycle. The brakes are magnesium. The triple trees are magnesium. The lower fork legs are magnesium. They use all the magnesium they could use because it's so lightweight. Surprisingly, they use steel rims. That's because they figured it was worth it, because the aluminum rims were denting and they were having problems with it. And the steel was stronger for a little bit more weight, but they were much stronger and they took the abuse well. But they were very successful. However, they put a big guy on them. Oh, what's his name? He was a big beast, and he was a great motocrosser, but he was heavy and he was hard on the machines, and he broke them a lot. He broke a lot of the bikes by racing them too hard and being such a large man. But they were very successful.
Was it Archie Johnson?
No.
He was a big guy.
Yeah, I'm trying to. He's a Brit, big Brit. They loved him over there. They loved him, but he, you know. And then there was two professionals that he had on these bikes, 2 or 3. But then the interesting story about CCM was, so they got bought. They went with Rotax motors, and they tried Rotax for a while, and then I think they got bought out by CCM. CCM might have bought them, and then after that, let me get this right. So CCM was making these, and then Harley-Davidson bought CCM because Harley-Davidson had the idea to have a military motorcycle. They wanted to get into government contracts, so they bought CCM for their Rotax-powered 500cc dirt bike, and they made the Harley-Davidson MT500, I believe it's called, and The problem is that at that point, after they bought it and they were going to distribute it throughout the world, and Harley was going to make all this money from this military dirt bike, the militaries across the country, especially the United States, came out and said, all of our gas-powered vehicles will be diesel. No more gas. So that was kind of put them in the coffin with that. No more gas-powered. So that's why they didn't really catch on. Some other countries, third world countries, bought them and used them, and that Harley-Davidson MT500 is now unfortunately worth more money than I can afford, because I could have bought one 20 years ago. I could have bought one for probably less than $5,000, but you probably won't find one today. But CCM, actually what's cool about CCM is that this is like a Vincent or a Bruff Superior. Actually, Bruff Superior is a better, because this is hand built. And it wasn't just hand built, it was custom built by order, bespoke, by people would place their orders, like a guy in McHenry who Dan knows, I forgot his name, but he had a shop out in McHenry, and he ordered 8 of these or 10 of these, and he was a dealer of CCM right in McHenry, Illinois. And but you would order
Larry Picos?
No. But you would order your bikes how you wanted them. Maybe you wanted, different front end, because they had a lot of different front ends on them.
Yes, Ken, they were great motorcycles, but I paid less for my 750 Trackmaster frame Triumph than the CCM sold for back in 1972. And now Ken is going to show us and explain the Harley-Davidson FXRS, maybe one of the best handling Harley-Davidsons ever built.
Here we have a 1982 FXRS, Harley-Davidson FXRS, the very first year FXR. It's the commemorative model of all the models in 1982, because that was the year that Harley bought back from AMF. And they had a factory rallying cry was "The Eagle Soars Alone." That was a big thing that they pushed in the factory. The Eagle soars alone, and so they came out with the commemorative eagle on all the front fenders. The FXR became a lot of people didn't like the bike because it had a triangulated rear section that they thought looked Japanese. So the real Harley purists didn't like it for 2 reasons.
Point this out on the frame.
First of all, a lot of Harley people didn't like this triangulated section on the rear because it looked Japanese to them. Because the Japanese at the time had that section there. They didn't like that. Also, what a lot of Harley purists didn't like was the fact that the engine was rubber mounted. So you couldn't feel all the vibrations and the whole bike didn't shake. And when you rode it, it felt like super technological bike because it's so smooth compared to the Harleys of the day. And this frame being a strong box section and triangulated section back there, this bike was built by engineers. Eric Buell and Von Beals and about 4 other engineers designed this bike to be a bike that they could ride with the European bikes of the day in the corners. A bike that would handle and be as good as a Moto Guzzi or whatever they had at the time back then, because they knew that Harley was way behind in technology with their motorcycles. So this bike has a high ground clearance. It had 13.5-inch rear shocks. It was set very high. It was a bike made to be ridden. And the design team, or the sales team, Willie G included, hated this bike because it didn't look the part. And they basically ended up saying Harley owners do not ride their bikes like that anyways. They just want to park their bikes and have their bikes look cool. They don't really ride like that. So you had a whole battle between the engineers and the sales team. They fought for years. So one year the engineers would win and they would get their way, and the next year the sales team would put a shorter rear shock because they kept wanting to slam the back end and make it lower. They wanted a low rider, you know? And the engineers said, well, if you go low, you're gonna scrape your pegs in the corners. So you had all that going on. But the fact that they spent so much time and energy on this rubber mounting this engine, the 5-speed transmission, by the time they came out with the Evolution motor with the 5-speed transmission and a rubber mount suspension like this, you had the perfect machine. You had the reliable evolution motor, a nice transmission. By 1986, I believe, they came out with a better 5-speed transmission, and you had probably the best bike they ever built still today. So it's a great machine, and 1991 or 92, they quit making them. They went with the Dyna because the Dyna was less money to manufacture. It only had 2 points of rubber contact on the motor, and the frame was a lot cheaper to manufacture. It wasn't as strong. This frame, they said, was 5 times stronger in tension and torsion than the FLH frame at the time. So much superior motorcycle, but change is hard for Harley people. Change is very difficult for Harley. They want to rip. That's why still today Harley-Davidson sells retro motorcycles that still sell like hotcakes, because everybody wants the retro thing, but they want the technology, which is always a tough thing to battle, you know. Yeah.
Thank you, Ken, for the great insight. I worked on one of those bikes, and I got to ride it, and it was a great handling motorcycle. And now Ken is going to show us a Harley-Davidson Sportster. This is the first year the Sportster was made, the 883 engine, and this is the bike that you could ride on the street, and you could race it on the weekends.
All right, this is a 1959 Harley-Davidson XL-CH. CH being the competition hot model, or there's different ideas of what the CH stands for, but the XL was the street version and the XL-CH was the race version. You could ride on the street. By 1959 was the first year they came out with a headlight and a tail light and speedometer. They were a bike that you could race on the weekends, and you could ride on the street to work during the week. The XL-CH was a kick only, of course. Magneto. It has no battery, doesn't need a battery, has a generator, and it's a great bike. In 1959, when this bike came out, they made 1,059 XL-CHs. And 1,059, so that's how many they made the CH competition model. And actually this exhaust is original exhaust, and if I take the mufflers off of it, it's slash cut because it came with no mufflers on it. And it's very light exhaust with a nice bend on it for racing. So it's a race bike, and people race them in scrambles, flat track, TTs, every kind of racing you could imagine. Very heavy bike, but the 900 883 motor was a good motor, and they were very fast.
Well, let me add something here. Back in '59, for flat track racing, it was a 750 flathead rule. But for TT racing, there was a 900 rule. So this would have been the bike that the Harley riders would have rode at Peoria in the TT. You could run a 900 in the heavyweight class. Then the lightweight class was for the flathead 750s. So Ray Schmitt, a good friend of mine, and you know Ray, you said he raced this exact bike and he would like to have it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So of course, 1959, they came out with this, and they ran the XL-CH Magneto model till 69, I believe. And this is what the Hells Angels wrote. All the old pictures of the Hells Angels in the early 60s, they were all on these XL-CHs. And so that being said, and then you factor in that they raced these motorcycles, and then the 70s when they started chopping them and customizing them to have an original 1959 XL-CH, of which they made 1,059 of them. Here's an original one, unmolested. There has to be less than 20 of these. There has to be less than 20 of these in the world, I'm imagining, you know. So a very rare bike.
Yes, Ken, it's great that you got that XL-CH Harley. And now we're looking at a painting that Norm Gruber had commissioned to put himself and his two sons in one picture together. First, the artist was just going to put the pictures together, and then he did a painting of Rick Gruber, Mark Gruber, and this is Norm Gruber. This composite of the Grubers is a pretty wonderful painting, I believe, and it's great that Ken has got a copy up in his shop. As long as we're talking about flat track racing, and that's what the Grubers participated in, both Mark and Eric earned national numbers. And we're going to see a photo of, first we're going to see Mark. This is a photo of him racing at Daytona short track, I believe. Then a picture of Eric. This is from a half mile. And then the last picture is Norm at the Daytona short track on his bike. And now let's talk about racing motorcycles.
And now we're going to take a look at my semi race. I'm running the Open Pro class on a groove track. My Triumph's running okay this far, but I had to run the semi. I get a good hole shot here. But going around the outside in the first corner is John McLennan, and he's from Gillette, Wyoming. You talk about attracting riders from all over the country. This may be one of the biggest vintage events in the country.
This is the fairgrounds in Davenport, Iowa. It is a hard groove track. To ride a groove track, you need brake control and throttle control. Some riders are so skilled that they use the brake to control the throttle. So they open the throttle up but regulate the throttle by keeping the rear brake on and feeding power to the track. I never quite learned that technique. And I really don't care too much for riding hard groove tracks. And now let's check out the action at a cushion track in Illinois. And then now it is time for the heat race. I am racing in the vintage class. The vintage class is for any motorcycle before 1980. There is no age limit. You can be young, you can be old. As we wait for the start, the light flashes. Jumping out front on that twin Suzuki, it is Sam Evans. It's a two-stroke twin 500cc, I believe. I'm riding a 750cc Triumph. Coming by now, that is Darwin Henshaw. He's on a 500cc Honda single. As you can see, I'm riding up high. I've dived down, get on the gas, power by the Suzuki, stay on the gas a little bit longer, take the eye line, go up by the hay bales. Now I'm going to square the corner off and dive down below, get a nice drive, get back on the gas. It's a little tough racing into the sun. I go up high, up by the hay bales, now square the corner off. Get on the gas as soon as possible. Get by this Honda. Riding up by the hay bales, now I square the corner off, come down. Get on the gas a little quicker than Darren. And this is what cushion racing is. Running up to the hay bales, going in, squaring the bike off. Trying to get on the gas a little bit sooner. I'm a little late getting on the gas. If you want to win races, you got to get on the gas quickly. But this is why I love a cushion track. It's more rough and tumble than a groove. I have a pretty good suspension setup on my Triumph, but you do need great upper body strength to ride a cushion properly. On this night, I was feeling great. I had a great time at the Champaign County Fair, running a good solid race with my Triumph. The Triumph was running great, but you can see you run up to the hay bales, square the corner off. You are using the rear wheel to steer the motorcycle. This is the kind of racing I love. This is the kind of racing I'm going to try to continue to do with my Triumph. There's still enough pushing tracks around. I'm going to try to make 4 to 5 half miles per year. I am up front, 1 lap to go, but I don't know where Henshaw is because I'm leading the race and I don't hear his Honda behind me. But I'm going into the last corner and I'm a little bit too cautious. I should have ran in a little harder and got on the gas a little quicker, but he snuck by and took the win. I took second. That's okay. I had a great time on this cushion half mile. And I'm racing my Triumph, which is a British motorcycle. And back in Ken's shop, we were spotting another British motorcycle. This is a Matchless G80. Ken's gonna tell us all about this Matchless motorcycle that uses a Rotex engine from Austria.
Talking about the Les Harris Matchless. Les Harris was I don't know if he worked for Triumph, but he raced for Triumph, I believe. But Les Harris kind of ended up with all of the Triumph parts, and he wanted to keep Triumph going when they were dying. He actually had the rights to Triumph. He wanted to get the complete rights to Triumph, but he had the parts. He was building bikes in England, all these parts from Triumph, and still keeping them going, keeping them alive. The Les Harris Triumphs were made, I think, 77 to 80 or whatever, and John Bloor wanted the rights to Triumph. John Bloor had the money and the wherewithal to build the factory, and he told Les to go ahead and go with it until I'm ready, till I build my factory, and then I'm going to take over Triumph. And Les Harris had to give it all over to John Bloor. But after that happened, Les Harris had the rights to Matchless somehow, and he said, I'm going to build Matchless G80. He used the name G80 because the Matchless G80 was a famous bike from the 60s, but he wanted to build a Matchless. So what he used was a Triumph made in England seat, gas tank, and other components. But it was really a worldwide bike because a large percentage of the Matchless G80 that Les Harris built was made in Italy. Italian front end, Italian components, wheels or whatever. Also Austrian engine, the Rotax engine, so it's really a mutt. But I think the frame was made in England, and he only made it for a couple years, and then after that, well, he was done, and that was the story. But it's a very rare bike, the Matchless G80. It's got the great proven Rotax 4-valve Rotex motor, which is a great motor. Has been built up for racing for many years, and that's the story of the Matchless G80.
And finally, a real fun dirt bike. This is a Hodaka Wombat, a great 125 off-road motorcycle. Now let's hear Ken's story about his Super Rat.
When okay, so my dad worked at OMC, Johnson Motors, and he would, when I was a little boy, and he would come home with motorcycles once in a while from guys he worked with at the factory. And one day he came home with a Hodaka Super Rat, and we pulled the gas cap, and it smelled like paint varnish, and I still remember that smell today and still love that smell of that paint varnish, that gasoline that had turned bad. And so me and my dad got that Super Rat running, and I was the only guy around with a chrome gas tank and a bike that did nice wheelies, and I loved my Super Rat, and it said Super Rat on the side of the thing. And so we used to ride near my house, but as I was getting older, the area was growing up and there's more houses, so now the fields that we used to ride in on Hippie Hill and places like that now became houses and neighborhoods and parks. So I was riding in the park, and a cop stopped me and said, you can't ride here in this place anymore because now it's a park, it's not a field. And I said, well, that's crazy. He said, well, either you impound your motorcycle, I impound your motorcycle, or you take it to court. And so I pushed my motorcycle behind the squad all the way down the street near the impound, And about halfway I got upset and I stopped and I said, I'm going to take it to court. And then I went and told my dad the story, and he said, that was a bad idea because now we're selling your motorcycle and you're going to pay for the court costs. So I should have impounded my motorcycle. But ever since then I always wanted a Hodaka like the one I had. So I couldn't come across a Super Rat, and I did find a Wombat, which is even better because it's a 125, a little bit bigger. And it needs a restoration or something, but it's going to be a nice bike someday, hopefully, if I get around to doing it. Hodaka being imported by Pabatco, which Pacific something company. It was Americans that wanted a nice trail bike. The 70s were the pinnacle of trail bikes. Everybody had to have a trail bike. Every manufacturer made a trail bike. They were selling like hotcakes. And they said, we're going to make it, but we're going to have to make it in Japan. And but what was cool about it was, yeah, it was imported from Japan, but it was very American, because they Americanized it with their names and everything else about it. And they won many races, you know, motocross and all kinds of races. They were very successful, very great bike, you know.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you for your wonderful hospitality, your great motorcycle collection, and your wonderful shop. We all had a great time at the Breakfast Club at Ken's. Contact me, it's teamdan45@gmail.com. I love to hear from my audience. Remember, you can always search on YouTube with Dan Schmitt Motorcycle Racing for great motorcycle racing action. And I highly encourage you to visit the World of Motorcycle Museum in Winamac, Indiana, just off Indiana 39, 4 miles south of North Judson. Give them a call at 574-896-3172. First, it's a great trip and a great collection of motorcycles.